We're honored to have with us today Dr. Rob Butler, who is a senior research scientist and biologist with Environment Canada's Canadian Wildlife Service. Dr. Butler is a founding director of the Young Naturalists Club of British Columbia and the Pacific Wildlife Foundation, where he is the current president. He has spoken to hundreds of groups all over the world, from community organizations and nature clubs to governments and scientific societies. As luck would have it, he's here to inspire us today. When I asked Dr. Butler how I should introduce him, he said, "I don't need any title. My friends just call me Rob." Everyone, here is a friend of the Coquitlam River watershed, just plain Rob.
Hear all the excitement that's happening with this organization. It really makes me feel good to see this and hear what's happening around here and see old friends like Craig. Well, we're not that old, are we, Craig? And Vern and many others. It's really a delight. What I'd like to do is to start this off with something that one of my friends and colleagues does. This is Ron Eidenberg, who's a professor at Simon Fraser University. And he's trying to understand what people's views are in the world. And what I'd like you to do, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to ask you to close your eyes and put your hand up and answer this question. So if you'd like to just close your eyes so nobody sees how you're going to answer. And I want you to tell me if you feel that the world will be worse off for your children and grandchildren than it is today. If you do, please put your hand up. Okay, you put your hands down now. Thank you. You can open your eyes. That was probably about 50 to 60% of you felt it's going to be worse off. The funny thing is, if you ask young people the same question at the university, 80% will put their hands up. They feel the world will be worse off than it is today. You have to ask yourself, why do we feel this way? Why are we so optimistic or so pessimistic about the world? When we look around us and we see there's actually all kinds of great things that have been happening. George pointed this out, some of the great things that are happening. And Gordon, about the river, the things that are happening around us. Bald eagles, which were, when I was a kid, very rare here, are now very, very numerous. In fact, they think that most of the birds of prey that were lost around the world because of DDT are now back to their former numbers. They've recovered. Whales are recovering like nobody thought they would happen. My colleague of mine, Jim Darling, who's been working on humpback whales off Tofino, has identified nearly 300 individual whales, and he's lost count. These are ones that he can actually identify. And when I left back in the 80s, to see a humpback whale out there was really quite a rare sight. They're very numerous. Sea otters are making a great recovery. They're coming back. There are all kinds of things that are very positive happening around the world. We can also look at just how we are doing around the world. We look at childhood survival. The childhood mortality has been falling around the world. There's lots of things to be very positive about. It's not that there aren't problems in the world. We all know there's big problems and we face them locally here. But I often wonder why we dwell so often on the pessimistic when there's lots of optimistic things happening. And you are part of that optimistic message, I think. 20 years ago, you would never see this kind of a group. And to see industry, First Nations, all the working groups here starting to work this around the watershed is something you should be very, very proud of. You're pioneering a movement. So I think there's lots of reasons why we should be optimistic. I went for a little walk yesterday down along the Burnett River with Rod McVicker. We wanted to have a look at the salmon that were coming up. And there's about 100 fish just about halfway up the river spawning. And it was great to see them. We went down to Blossom Creek and there's lots of fish coming up the river there. And to think that we've got this right in the city, right here, right around the city. I don't know if you remember, but maybe, was it 2 summers ago, that gray whale that came into Vancouver? It swam around Stanley Park. We went out to see if we could photograph and identify this whale, and it was right in beside Siwash Rock. And there were people gathering along the walk, looking down, and you could look right on top of this whale. And it swam out around 3rd Beach, and people were going into the water. People were swimming out with their cameras. There were people in kayaks. And there was this mass of people. It was like it was the second coming or something. They were coming along the seawall, following this whale. It was a remarkable thing. It was more fun, I thought, watching the response of people to this one whale than it was that there actually was a whale there. Some of the work we've been doing in our foundation has just pointed out Actually, these whales that we're seeing on the south coast during the summer are genetically distinct from the herd, from the other 20,000. They're actually probably remnants that have come from a few mothers that survived the whaling of 100 years ago, and they're starting to repopulate and come back. We had a fur seal down in Port Moody just last month. Came right in by the sea pen down there. There's lots of great things to be optimistic about. A few years ago, I had the fortunate opportunity to go to Taiwan and have a look at some of the conservation projects they were working on. And one of them is a river. And it was really quite interesting. The river had been very, very badly degraded on the lower reaches. And I had a chance to talk to the mayor of the city. And they said that what they decided to do was to try to fix this river up. And they thought they would start with a small stretch and see what they could do. So they took about 1 kilometer or so, and they planted it, and they put a nice walkway around it. The people who lived nearby were so thrilled by this that they pushed on, and now a big stretch of the river has all been reclaimed. The water's improving, birds are starting to come back, the whole river is coming back. And they're very, very proud of this, that this has been a success. Several years before that, I was in Italy, and I went to a wetland that has been set aside as a big bird sanctuary. And it was quite interesting that the people that put this aside said that when they initially wanted to set it aside, everyone said, well, there's no birds. There's no birds here. Why would you set it aside? And they said, well, there were birds in the past. And I think the reason there aren't any is because we don't have the sanctuary. We don't have anywhere that birds can go and feel safe. Well, there was a lot of skepticism, a lot of people there. But one of the mayors decided he would take the chance on this thing. And they set this aside. They set aside this protected area. And sure enough, the birds came back. And it's now considered an important bird area in Italy. It's a very important area. It's got a designation. And people flock down to it. Kids come down to see all the birds. And it's been a great success. What I'm trying to say to you is that nature is resilient if we give it a chance. And it's a matter of providing that chance, making sure it happens. For people like us who are a bit crazy about nature, it's pretty easy for us to sell this. But there's a lot of people out there that may not feel quite the same. But the thing that we need to tell people about is there's actually great benefits for this that go beyond just going to see salmon and going to see birds. There are direct health benefits from all this. And we know now, there's a ton of literature on this, that says if you have green space where you live, you will be healthier than if you don't. They know that there's situations that it's a direct health benefit on cardiac condition and many other forms of health. And there's some people who are even saying, by doing this, providing green space, getting people out, making them healthier, means they don't draw on the health plan as much. That means maybe the taxes don't have to be as high. So by putting aside green space, you're starting to think about your whole human health and the conditions of your society. So that is, in a sense, what you're doing here. It's more than fish, it's more than the river. It's actually the health of people here in Coquitlam. We also know the same thing happens with children. That children who are given free play in nature become much more creative. It helps towards ADHD and all kinds of behavioral problems. It's well established that having kids in nature is good for the kids and for their development. Now I want to just finish with one little thing I've been thinking about over the last little while, and this is what I call the century test. We think about how long Europeans have lived here in British Columbia, 150 years. We spend a lot of time generating an awful lot of money and a lot of energy, but what do we have to show for it? What do we really have to show for it? The bridges that we've set up are going to be coming down, we're going to get a new bridge. The buildings that have been built, they're not going to last more than 30 or 40 years. New ones are going to come in. Why are we doing all of this if there's nothing left after it? There's nothing to show that we were here and did anything useful. What's wrong with us? So I look at this and I think, what are those things that will pass that test? That in a century from now, we'll look back and people will say, that was a great thing to do. Well, setting aside this river is exactly one of those things that will pass the century test. It's been here for 9,000 years, and it's had salmon in it, and that's what you're doing, is you're trying to restore it. We almost lost it, but because of all the actions that you've been involved in, it is now coming back as a great river. This is the thing that you will pass on to your children, and your children will pass that on to theirs. It is something that we will have that will pass that century test. Thank you.